You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode, I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today, on the Adiel Gorel Show.
Well, we now know that it's multi-directional. We used to say not too long ago, well, the gut and the brain, they're bi-directional. Now we know it's multi-directional, incorporating in the other organ systems like the immune system and so on.
Hi everyone, it's a joy to be here with you. And once again, I have the great pleasure of having Dr. Felice Gersh here with us. Last time I met you, Dr. Gersh, it was we just couldn't stop. That's why we have another interview. You're just exploding with so much great knowledge. So I'm excited about this. And today we're going to be talking with you. You are so full of information that it's not like you say, today there's an interview with Dr. Gersh. No, today we talk to Dr. Gersh about the brain, because there's so much that you have. So we have to sub-categorize it, which is great. So today we're going to talk about the brain. And just to begin with, not to distinguish between men and women, the brain is always looked upon as something special, something mysterious almost, and maybe a part of us that we still don't know quite as well as some of the other parts, which are a little more mechanical. So just to begin with, what are your thoughts about the connection between the body and the brain and what the brain means?
Well, this connection is so critical to understand that it's all like a complex spider web, with the woven interconnectivity between the brain and every other part and parcel, every organ system of the body. Unfortunately, back several centuries ago, there was this miscommunication that came out, and it really had to do with dividing secular versus religion and all this, but it ended up, the political got into medical, and that was a problem. And so this whole philosophy of the brain is so separate from the rest of the body, when that turns out to be a false premise. It's all connected. And once you see how it really connects, and it connects on a variety of methodologies, and that's where it's so important to look at all of them. When you look at neurotransmitters and the immune system and the autonomic nervous system, which controls issues in the body that we don't think about, like sweating, temperature, pupils dilating, peristalsis of the gut, and so on, all of that is completely interconnected with the CNS, the central nervous system. So every organ system is related to the health of the brain. And there's such a connectivity between cognitive function and emotional status. So that's another thing, that false premise, which now is being eliminated. So now people talk about neuropsychiatry, that it's not like this divide between neurology and psychiatry, as if the emotions are different from cognition, when they're all completely interconnected. So that's what makes talking about the brain so fascinating, so complex, and so important.
Well, isn't part of it also that we are talking today on the 25th of November, 2022. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Thanks.
And everything science or medicine knows is what we can measure, what we have studied, what we have seen in experimentation up until the 25th of November 2022. Mm-hmm. If we jump into the 25th of November 2122, 100 years into the future, our conversation could be very different, because the measurements, the knowledge, the understanding, especially of something like the brain, might be vastly different than the relatively primitive way we're looking at it now. And so that's something to bear in mind, really.
Well, I talk to my patients similarly all the time. It's like what I tell you today may not be what I tell you a year from now, not just 100 years from now, which that's a long stretch, but even a year from now, because philosophies change, knowledge base changes, approaches change. So absolutely, we always do the best in the moment. So everything we know now is very different from what we knew before and what we will know. And there's an old saying about medical school that half of what you learn in medical school is wrong, but you don't know which half. So it's definitely everything is in flux, right? So we work with where we are now, and we know a lot more now than we did a few years back, even. So that's strides in the right direction.
So, of course, the very tempting model, which is a bit of a simplified model, is that people say, well, we have a body, and the body, from one standpoint, could be looked at as very mechanical, with pipes, and we have pumps, and we have all kinds of things. But then we have this great computer that sits on top. It's easy to look at it as a computer. It has memory, it has very much like a computer system, and people say maybe one day computers in the world are going to exceed the capacity of the brain. But we know it's very different than just being a computer with computational powers, memory, a CPU. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because it's really very different, isn't it?
Well, the brain as a control center has much more to do with so many things than just like turn on and off, like sort of like the early computers where you had like binomial. It's like an either off or on. There's many shades of gray, and there are many different ways that the body needs to be functioning in terms of survival and reproduction. So one of the places that I begin in order to understand the brain and what it does is to understand the prime directive of life, which we've talked about, and it always gets forgotten in our world. And that is that the prime directive of life is the creation of new life. And the human species is the only animal species on this planet that actually actively tries to control reproductive function and destiny. That is not what any other animal species on this planet does. Like if you go into the wild, you don't see a bunch of baboons or giraffes or lions and say, oh, this is a bad year to have a baby. Let's use contraception. No, it's not going to happen, And so humans need to accept that we're not computers, that we are living dynamic creatures, and that we are the only ones that try to control reproduction. And that once you accept, which I figured this out very early in my career because I was delivering thousands of babies as an OB-GYN, that the prime directive is the creation of new life. And so every system in the body is designed for that very function. So in order to have successful reproduction, if we look first at like a female, so in order to be successful, you need to have an amazing immune system that's going to be dynamic, because during pregnancy, you have to have an immune system that's not going to be an attack animal, right? An attack and kill this foreign creature. Well, we need to have a system that's going to control that in a very dynamic way. And then you need to have a very healthy heart. Well, in pregnancy, there's a huge increase in blood volume. So you need to have some system in the body that's going to enable the female heart to suddenly become much more powerful in pregnancy to allow the ability to pump all of that extra blood volume. And you need to have the ability to deal with digestion and, of course, cardiovascular health in every different aspect. So you need to have a musculoskeletal system. And all of that has to be interconnected and woven with the brain. So you can see that the complexity becomes really astronomical. And, of course, you need to have excellent cognition. You need to have judgment. You need to have decision making at a very high level in order to avoid danger, to figure out where's food coming from, how to care for multiple children at the same time. So to be successful with reproduction means every organ system has to be aligned, working in the same time zone, optimally functioning. You need to have, of course, proper egg production, ovulation. You need to have this changing status during pregnancy. And all of this is ultimately regulated by the neurological systems of the body, which are very heavily intertwined with the brain. So this is such an amazing, all-encompassing system. And once you recognize that everything is about reproduction and survival, because not only do you have to be able to get pregnant and have a baby, you need to survive to keep raising the children and do this process multiple times over. So you need to have a brain that can basically control so many systems and align them in unison and synchrony to have success with all of these issues. It's really amazing. And then what you can do, once you accept all of this reality, you can then look in more detail. Okay, so how does the brain control energy regulation? Because in order to be successful with reproduction, you need to have the proper metabolism. You need to have incoming food to meet the demands of the body. And then, of course, if you have a baby on board as well. So what are the systems in the body that regulate appetite control and regulation? And how do you regulate this complex immune system? And how do you control the health and function of the musculoskeletal system and every organ system? And then you see, okay, how does the brain interconnect with all of these systems? And it's both incredibly fun to learn about how this all works together and fascinating. And, you know, it's amazing. The brain has such incredible responsibilities, and it goes way beyond, and is so much more complex than just saying, should I make a right turn or a left turn, you know, or, you know, is this bigger, is this blacker, is this, you know, I mean, the abilities of our human brain excel beyond any computer system that has ever been created, and it's the miracle of life itself, you know. So you can talk about philosophy and like how did this evolve? You know, it's like amazing what the brain actually controls, all the different systems. And I didn't even really touch on the circadian rhythm to make sure that all the systems in the body are literally working together in unison in the same time zone, you know, and how every organ system has cells that have clock genes, how they interrelate. It's just beyond amazing. I mean, you could spend your life, as I have, trying to understand this and evolving with the evolving data. So, and if you don't even start thinking about the brain on this really like huge, like the umbrella look of the brain and what it does through the body, you'll only see it through the lens of little pieces of it.
So many things that I could ask, but I'll ask a small question, actually. We talked about the circadian rhythms. We talk about, it's clear that our system as a human is integrated with the bigger system, and that's the planet that we are on. I mean, we submit to gravity, we submit to all kinds of, electromagnetism that the Earth has. We are part of that, and our whole system, brain included, functions within the gravity fields and electric fields of where we are. Now, just yesterday in the newspaper was that Jeff Bezos's girlfriend is going to go to space, just like some people has, like he has. So can you even speculate? I mean, I know it's just a kind of out of left field. Here is this person, in this case female, because you talked about female brain, but you know, we all, here she is, no gravity, all the electromagnetic fields that the Earth gives, the radiation of the sun as it hits us when we are here is completely different. And let's say she's going to spend only one day in space. Now she lands back. I would speculate, and I want to see what you think about it. Her system for that one day is going to be completely discombobulated. I mean, all the cues that our system needs to do all those wondrous things you talk about are not going to be there, or maybe most of them. The question is, the next day when she comes back to Earth, is there going to be long-lasting damage, or is this just a blip that's going to regulate itself back?
Well, these are really important questions for space travel, and I love science fiction. I watched, I think, every Star Wars and Star Trek and all these, fantastical movies of space travel. But the reality is that just as you began this conversation, we are Earthlings. We evolved to live and thrive on planet Earth with all the rhythms of Earth, which include the circadian rhythm, which is the 24-hour axis rotation, and as well the seasonal rotations. We know that most animals breed according to the seasons as well, and there's even very small blips of rhythms even within the 24-hour rhythm. And of course, females have the amazing rhythm that's aligned with the moon, the lunar rhythm, the menstrual cycle. So yes, we are Earthlings and we thrive on this planet. And whenever we lose our connection with our circadian cues and what's going on, we will suffer physical injury. So we know that astronauts, when they're up out of gravity and so on, they lose a lot of lean body mass, they lose bone, they lose muscle, and they have to create artificial day and night. We know that people who live in cubicles where they hardly ever see the light of day, they've done studies where they take people and put them in windowless rooms for a period of time, and they become completely, talk about like discombobulated. They don't know, if they can't tell if it's day or night. They don't know when they should eat, when they should sleep. When you take people and put them in windowless rooms for a few days or certainly weeks, they really become lost and they become unhealthy and dysregulated. And we know people who are blind where they actually have no light. You can be blind, but you still have a sense of light and dark. And that will help to give the cues to the master clock that sits, of course, in the brain to control this circadian rhythm system within our bodies. But when we have people who are blind and they are living essentially in a total state of blackness, that they have much poorer health status because of lack of these cues. In terms of how long the damage is from a very brief visit to space, probably not too long. Like we know, for example, when they talk about traveling across time zones, that, or if you have a change of time, with the daylight savings and so on, that 1 hour of change in your day, 1 hour, it will take a good solid 1 week, 7 days to recover from 1 hour. So when people travel across time zones where there are 5, 7, 8, 12 hours time zone change, you can see how long it would take them to recover from just that time zone change. When you add in loss of gravity, other cues, and so on, I would only guess that it would be 2 to 3 times that amount of time to recover. But I don't know of any hardcore data on that. Like you said, this is a lot of musings as well. But certainly, these are things that are very important to the space program, is to understand what are the physiologic, which is going to correlate in some way with the emotional changes and cognitive changes that can occur with space travel.
So I'm thinking about, now that you said that, somebody going from San Francisco to Paris, and that's an 8-hour gap, 8 hours. Now, typically they would say, we're going on vacation, we're going for a week and a half, okay? Well, now, if it's an 8-hour, it'll take them 8 weeks to recuperate fully, but they return in a week and a half. So, I mean, it's like, what really happened?
We don't even have great data on that. That's where I try, when I know people are doing that, and myself included, what I tell people to try to accelerate the recovery from this is, if possible, and there's data on this, okay? If you literally fast for 24 hours, the 24 hours that is part of the travel day. And who does this? I know people, eating, but they're often eating around the clock on those days, the exact opposite of what you should do, eating at all the wrong times. But if you actually fasted for the 24 hours during the day of travel, and you try to stay up, like, so say you're traveling far, you actually, that whole night that precedes when you arrive, say in the morning in Paris, usually you have a morning arrival. If you stayed up that whole previous night, and then you stayed up that whole day, and then you took like 6 milligrams of melatonin for that day and the next 2, and then you started eating immediately according to the rhythms of Paris, and the normal, then that will help speed up your sort of acclimation to that new time zone. And then you try to do the reverse on the way back. And when I have done that, I have found that I have gotten into that rhythm and feel so much better, so much faster. But it's not like most people will do that. They don't want to stay up and they don't want to fast. I happen to have a lifetime history of staying up at night. I'm not recommending that on a routine basis, but that was the story of my life for decades when I was doing all those deliveries. Because I didn't get, like, why are all these women going into labor all night and then often delivering in the very early morning hours? It's like, this is killing my nights, night after night. Well, now I understand that's part of actually the built-in circadian rhythm of pregnancy, because it's, once again, all about survival for reproductive success. Because when a woman is in labor, she's extremely vulnerable to whatever, a wild animal or something, so she can't really get up and protect herself when she's in labor. So they made it so that women are timed in nature to go into labor when it gets dark, and then to labor through the darkness of night, and then deliver as the light is coming back with dawn, and then they can be okay and they can move or protect themselves and their new baby. So that's why, if they say, why are all these women going into labor in the middle of the night? It's actually built into our beautiful rhythm systems, which are all controlled by the brain.
It's fascinating. I mean, when you travel, would it also be, well, you said staying up during the day, just the cues of the light, the blue sky, the sun, that would help too with the time shift.
Oh yeah. So what I do is, when I travel like that, I bring a very nice sleep mask, so an eye mask, so that I can turn it into night when it's supposed to be night. If I just want to close my eyes for a little bit, I try not to sleep, right? Unless it's the night of the place where I'm going, okay? So, it depends on where you're going. Like, for example, if you're going to Paris, you need to stay up all night because you're going to land in the morning. If you're going to Australia, that's an easier trip. That's actually much easier, because you go to bed when they're kind of going to bed, and then you get up when they would be getting up, more or less. It's like a little bit easier. They always say it's easier when you go in that direction. But to try to get onto their schedule during that day of travel. And you can sort of, by not giving cues to your body through eating, because that is another cue, is when you eat. And the nutrient sensors pick that up, along as well as the gut microbiome, and communicate with the other organs. But by fasting, you sort of keep all of that quiet, and then you get right back on the beat. It's kind of like, if you're a musician, if you get lost or something, just stop playing and then go back into the beat with at the right time, and then you'll be back playing with the rest of the orchestra at the right time.
So, we talk about the brain and how all the systems of the body really kind of circulate back to the control of the nervous system. There are all of those expressions. I have a gut feeling, and people now talk about our second brain, the gut biome. What do you make of that?
Well, we now know that it's multi-directional. We used to say not too long ago, well, the gut and the brain, they're bi-directional. Now we know it's multi-directional, incorporating in the other organ systems like the immune system and so on. But we have this amazing interconnectivity through what is known as the autonomic nervous system. So if you say there's two giant collections of neurons in the body, the two biggest ones would be the central nervous system, the CNS, and the gut nervous system, which is called the enteric nervous system, that can be abbreviated ENS. And they're both huge collections of neurons. Now, they don't function exactly the same. So the gut is not the second brain in the sense that it's doing the same functions. Like, it doesn't have the equivalent of the cerebral cortex. It doesn't have the hippocampus for the memories. But what it has is a huge collection of neurons. And it also has its own special embedded immune system with specialized modified macrophages. And the macrophages of the immune systems are the phages, they're the gobblers. So they do phagocytosis. And there's a whole system of microglia that are existing in the brain and also in the gut enteric nervous system. And they connect together in vital ways through signaling agents that are involving the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome, when you have the right microbial populations and then you eat the right foods, which have a lot of fiber in them, they ferment. The microbes ferment and create these metabolic byproducts called short-chain fatty acids, which communicate with the liver. They communicate with the pancreas, but there's one of them called butyrate. There's three: acetate, propionate, butyrate. And butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid, so it's type of fat, so it acts as food for the lining cells of the gut. But it turns out it also can pass out of the body and it can connect to this big finger of the brain. That's called the vagus nerve. So it's like a big finger of the brain that comes down, and then it has branches of nerves that go to every organ system. And that big vagus nerve actually has receptors and binds to butyrate, which is a product produced by gut microbial life forms. Like, how that just shows the symbiosis between our gut microbiome and our neurological system. Now, the vagus nerve is the portion of the autonomic nervous system that controls all the things we don't actively think about. And that is the calming part, the parasympathetic, that makes you feel, happy and enables sleep and sort of calmness. It slows the heartbeat. It enables blood vessels to dilate, relax. It increases blood flow to like the skin, and it causes proper digestion because you're in a calm state, so digestion can carry on. And it balances the sympathetic nervous system, which are clusters of neurons that are called ganglion nerve clusters, and that is the sort of activating for stress. And they have different neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitter for the vagus nerve, which is the parasympathetic, is acetylcholine, which is heavily controlled, by the way, by the hormone from the ovaries called estradiol, a form of estrogen. And the neurotransmitter that acts as a signaling agent for the sympathetic or stress side of the autonomic nervous system is norepinephrine and epinephrine. And everyone knows if you give someone epinephrine, you've probably heard of that makes your heartbeat go up. That's part of the stress response. And so what happens is if you don't have the right microbes and you have the right diet, you don't make enough of this butyrate, and you don't have proper stimulation, because the butyrate can actually bind to receptors on the vagus nerve, sort of inactivating more parasympathetic tone. We call it vagal tone, more action on the calming side of the autonomic nervous system. And if you don't have the right gut microbes and the right food, then what do you have? You have an overload and an imbalance of sympathetic, which is the stress response. So people end up in a constant state of stress, which translates into poor sleep, anxiety, sweating, so many, and poor digestion, because if you're in a stress mode, that means survival mode. So you're going to run for your life, fight for your life. The last thing your body needs to do is worry about digestion at that time. So you're going to have poor digestive function if you have chronic states of overregulation over imbalance with the sympathetic. So that's where it's so amazing to recognize the role that can come into play with the food that you choose to eat, also when you eat it, because these are all circadian timed functions, and as well, having the proper sleep, which will also affect it. And that's where mind-body medicine, which is not like what I say, not woo-woo, that actually can cause you to upregulate the parasympathetic. We live in a society now where it's so like epidemic to have chronic states of anxiety and insomnia. And a lot of this actually goes back to wrong diet, wrong time of eating, and having the wrong microbial life forms, and then you don't make enough of this critically important butyrate. And if you don't have the right butyrate, not only do you not have proper reaction of your autonomic nervous system to have more calming, you have this imbalance, but you're going to have an unhealthy gut directly because you don't have the food that feeds the lining cells. So there's many layers upon layers where things go awry. And that's why there's this amazing situation where if you don't have the right food and you don't eat at the right time, and you also, augment the problem by, translating bad other health habits, like you're sleeping at the wrong time, you're always traveling across time zones, you have too much light, because remember, it's multi-directional. So if you have imbalance with your circadian rhythm, you lead a stressful life, you don't have love and purpose, you're not fit, and you don't do all those things, the problem with the brain will then affect the gut in turn, because the vagus nerve comes from the brain. So it's like you need to do the whole balance. That's what makes the problems with conventional medicine, because they don't want to go into all these things. They don't take the time. Okay, so what are you eating? When are you eating? Are you exercising? Are you sleeping? What's your stressors in life? That's not going to be dealt with in a typical 7-minute medical appointment. And so that's where we fall down flat in terms of what are we going to do? And unfortunately, even psychiatrists are not really looking at this really critical role of the gut and how that translates into both cognitive and emotional states of the brain through, your gut function. And even the gastroenterologist, because so many people now have chronic problems with GERD, that's like acid reflux, and they have chronic constipation and irritable bowel. This is all interrelated with what you eat and when you eat, and that's why it turns out women, we talk a little bit about women, that's who I deal with the most, but I also deal with men, but women have the highest incidence of what they call functional gut problems, like irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, well, it turns out that that's because their brains work a little bit differently, and the estrogen that is so critical to work to make everything work with the vagus nerve isn't really working properly when you have a lot of stress and inflammation, and you're on hormonal contraceptions, or you're in menopause and so on. So you need the proper hormones to support the autonomic nervous system as well. And when you have stress, that as well augments the problem, and you end up with bowel dysfunction that connects to brain dysfunction. That's why when women get upset and they're worried, they often translate into bowel dysfunction. And we know after menopause, women have a higher incidence of acid reflux than do men, because without adequate estrogen in the form of estradiol, they have even more functional dysregulation of their GI tract, and then that leads to more anxiety. So it's all interrelated. After menopause, the incidence of mood disorders in women, anxiety and depression, at least doubles. And in women who have a history of such things, it quadruples or more. And the gut problems increase. They're all interrelated, and it's just fascinating understanding the linkage between the autonomic nervous system talking back and forth, and how it also interrelates with the immune system, because we have this incredible immune system that's embedded in both the gut and in the brain. And when you have the wrong hormonal triggers, then those immune cells can become overactive in the sort of, we'll say, activated state, when they become like more like weapons of mass destruction, because these are modified macrophages which have the ability to make enzymes that can literally dissolve tissue, and they're designed to dissolve pathogens. That's why there's so many of them in the gut, because of the risk. If you go back, think about thousands of years ago, unfortunately it's not that uncommon today, of food poisoning, right, of eating bacteria contaminated food. And so you need to have these immune cells that are going to be activated to deal with that and communicate with the immune system at large to deal with the potential of food poisoning. Well, nowadays, when you don't have the right hormones, they become like activated as if you had food poisoning, even when you don't, and they can create this chronic pro-inflammatory state. And you can have the same thing happen in the brain, and those immune cells become like activated even when they shouldn't. So they're like weapons of mass destruction that are activated to create an inflammatory response when there's no need for that. And so when you have that in the brain, you have neuroinflammation, which we now underlies both mood disorders and cognitive disorders. And when it's in the gut, you have complete dysregulation of peristalsis, that is controlled by the nervous system of the gut, so you don't have proper digestion. And that leads to the next level of problems. You don't digest food and you don't get the nutrients in. So then you have a whole series of nutrient deficiencies. And we know that if you don't have every single micronutrient, then nothing's going to work right. You can't just say, well, it's okay, I don't have any magnesium. Oh, it's okay, I don't have any selenium. No, you can't. Every single micronutrient is essential for making coenzymes, cofactors, for DNA stability, and so for so many different functions in the body. So you can see how this can be like a downward spiral. And it can all start at any point in this spiral.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.